Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, December 30th, 2020, and today we're going to be taking a look at the state of Georgia yet again. I know you guys are probably tired of hearing about Georgia. It was the focus for a very short period of time of the 2020 presidential election. Following the 2020 presidential election, a focus for a very long period of time up until now and probably for the next 6 days. So the election officially occurs in 6 days, and by that time we will have a general idea of how the race is going to go. Now, it is going to be a nail-biter. We are going to be waiting late into the evening until we find out who the actual winner will be, considering that there is still a very huge influx of vote-by-mail voters. It's probably going to go on for days if we're talking about the final counts, but hopefully the margin of victory for whoever it might be is large enough that we can actually project it ahead of time, because I can tell you we don't want to be waiting even longer until we find out who is in control of the United States Senate. But this video is mainly to talk about the very real scenario that a Republican and a Democrat could win in the state of Georgia. And I know that seems crazy, considering that both of these races are on the exact same ballot. There is always the possibility that David Perdue or Kelly Loeffler wins and Jon Ossoff or Raphael Warnock wins as well. And if that is the case, the Republican Party does take control in the United States Senate, but it comes down to a point where one Republican defector, just one, can overturn a Senate vote in favor of the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party is actually in a somewhat good position regardless. If they hold all of the states that they carried back in 2020 in the presidential race, well, they should win roughly 51, maybe even 52 seats, depending on the results of this race in 2022. But if that isn't the case, well, the Democratic Party has the next 2 years to have 48 seats in the United States Senate. That's the closest the Democratic Party has been since 2017 for that 1 year period of time where the Democratic Party was actually 51-49 in the minority because Alabama had flipped. But after 2018, the Democratic Party didn't really have too many hopes entering into 2020, looking at the Senate map. And the Democratic Party made a number of those states competitive, but not down to a point where they actually won. Take a look at Maine, take a look at Montana, take a look at Kansas, South Carolina, all states that were narrower than they were expected to be starting off with the initial characterizations, but not enough to a point where the Democratic Party could win. But looking at Georgia, both of these seats are in contention. The Democratic Party could absolutely win either Georgia or Georgia Senate runoff. But if that happens, the Democratic Party is going to be in a position where they're in the minority, but they can convince one or even two Republicans to vote with them. Then they have the majority for votes that matter. We're talking about Susan Collins, who labels herself as a bipartisan senator. Lisa Murkowski, who has shown that she isn't always going to fall party line. Mitt Romney, who sometimes pushes away from the Trump agenda, but considering Trump won't be the president at that point, I can't imagine he'd be too opposed to a more conservative agenda, considering the people that he represents. But there's always that possibility, and I think that's something that's going to be in the back of the head of Mitch McConnell if they move forward in this scenario. But also, this is something that other people actually are expecting. Based off the predicted market, where many people spend thousands upon thousands of dollars betting on a single political race, a lot of the times, these people aren't just throwing money in there just so one candidate can look better. Nobody cares who's leading in the betting odds at the end of the day. Nobody is basing their vote because Kelly Loeffler is leading in the Georgia Senate special election betting odds. This is for people to make money. This is for people to take an analytical point of view on the race and actually spend money, because at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones losing out. Nobody else. If they bet money on a Georgia race and they are wrong because of their own personal bias, that is on them, which is exactly why the betting markets actually have been sometimes, not always, but sometimes more accurate than the polling data. So when I'm looking at these results, I know there's a reason why Kelly Loeffler is significantly lower than David Perdue. I know there is a reason. The main reason is approval rating. The second main reason is because Kelly Loeffler is far more right-wing than David Perdue. David Perdue gives off a more moderate Republican type of feel. When you talk about him as a candidate, he isn't one of those radical right-wingers that you would see being depicted by the Republican Party. By the Democratic Party. Kelly Loeffler, however, she's the perfect candidate to be so. Her ads are always about President Trump, talking about her 100% voting record. I mean, you've been in the Senate for a year. I'd be surprised if it was under 100%, given how Republican she is, but looking at Kelly Loeffler as a candidate, she's way more to the right than David Perdue. While both of them are clinging on to President Trump and his baseless claims of election fraud, when you're looking at Kelly Loeffler as a person, she's just one of the more conservative members of the United States Senate, definitely outweighing David Perdue. Enough so that people think that's something that could actually push away Georgia voters. And I also agree, because when you're looking at the voters that elected Joe Biden, they did not choose Donald Trump because of his conservative policies, because of the way that he handled the presidency. Many of those voters had voted for Donald Trump in the 2016 election. There was a crossover vote. And when you have a Senate candidate who is hugely, a staunch supporter of President Trump, David Perdue absolutely is, but Kelly Loeffler to a whole nother degree, obviously they're going to be pushing away those voters who already rejected President Trump on ballot number 1. So when it comes down to the United States Senate, some of those voters may be inclined to vote for Raphael Warnock, and in turn maybe even Jon Ossoff, or they would be more inclined to vote for David Perdue, but not Kelly Loeffler. And that's exactly what Predicted is telling us too. It costs a lot more money to say David Perdue is going to win, and it's very actually almost even with the Democratic Party in the Georgia special election. Kelly Loeffler's chances have been deteriorating as well. Based off the data that we've seen, Raphael Warnock has now taken a 2-point lead. Now, in tomorrow's video, we'll be jumping more into this, more into the early voting data, and talking about what I actually think 5 days out of the election. But this is a scenario where we could actually see a Republican victory in the regular election and a Democratic victory in the special election. I think that is the only way this actually happens. It could happen another way, but 99% of those scenarios are going to end up being a Warnock victory and an Ossoff loss. But also, as I mentioned in numerous videos, stranger things have happened this year. Hopefully, 2021 is better. But looking at where Raphael Warnock is, he has almost always consistently outperformed Jon Ossoff in all of the polling data. In fact, since this has been launched, Raphael Warnock has done better than Jon Ossoff. Immediately following the election, Perdue was up 4 points and Loeffler was up 1 point. You can see a very clear difference. That's a difference of 3 points. Now, Ossoff is up 1 point, Warnock is up 2 points. So there's always that difference that actually favors Raphael Warnock, just because, when you're looking at the election data, Raphael Warnock is doing better because of Loeffler's lower approval rating. A lot of these polls include approval rating, and Kelly Loeffler has gone down to a point where sometimes she's in the low 30s, high 20s in terms of approval. But obviously, a very significant portion of those people who disapprove of her as a senator are still voting for her. Why? Because she has the R by her name, because she was endorsed by President Trump. People still don't realize how close the presidential race was. But also on that same ballot, David Perdue received 49.7% of the vote. What happened in the special election? The Republicans only received a combined 49.4% of the vote. It seems like a very small decrease, but had Donald Trump had that increase on his presidential ballot, he would have been the one who won Georgia. So that 0.3 makes a huge difference, makes a huge, huge difference. And it's come down to a point where I would not be surprised if David Perdue won and Raphael Warnock won. That is a scenario that should scare, Democrats and even Republicans, just because of the fact that would put the Senate majority very, very close, that just one defect could really make or break a Senate vote. But based off what we've seen so far, I really think that this is a scenario that could absolutely occur. Generally, we wouldn't even be discussing it, because realistically, if you're voting for a Republican on ballot number 1, or at least question number 1, and question number 2 is the same exact thing practically, and you're voting for a Democrat, that's when you start to see split ticket voters. And to be fair, there were barely any in this election, but looking at, or at least barely any that favored the Democratic Party mainly, which is exactly why I wouldn't see this as the most probable scenario. But also, when you're looking at Georgia, it's just a very weird state. They love traditional Republicans, they push away Trumpisms, but also they still vote for candidates that support President Trump. Statewide races, House races. But then again, when you're looking at the most previous election results, it's kind of shaky for Republicans here, but it's by no means a solid Democratic state. It's by no means a state that people should be referring to, oh, that's a Democratic state. No, it's still a Republican state. It just voted for a Democrat one time. Do you think people went after Indiana in 2010, campaigned there and said, this is a Democratic state? They didn't, because it wasn't a Democratic state. It was a swing state, but to be fair, it was a Republican state. The same thing could happen to Georgia, or it could turn into the new Virginia. People didn't call Virginia an immediate blue state just because Obama won it in 2008, even though he won it by 7 points. 2012, he won it again, but entering into 2016, it was back to being a swing state. Well, after 2016 and then 2020, Yes, you can call it a blue state now, but Georgia's not one of those states. This is the first time it flipped blue in 28 years, and I think the Democratic Party obviously knows better than to call it a Democratic state, than to assume that they are going to perform as well as they did on the presidential race. And if they do that, if they perform as well as they did on the presidential race, they actually lose the state because you need above 50% in this runoff election. It can't enter into runoff number 2. That just won't happen. But looking at the presidential race, they actually need to expand off the vote that they won. They need to expand off what Joe Biden did. And it's actually quite difficult to see. Not only did David Perdue outperform Kelly Loeffler and Republicans combined, but Jon Ossoff underperformed Raphael Warnock and Democrats combined. In the special election, the Democratic Party received 48.4% of the vote. Jon Ossoff only received 47.9%. So not only are the betting markets telling us a story, which I wouldn't 100% trust based off the betting markets, but also the election data is telling us the same thing. I made a whole video about why Georgia polls might actually be accurate this election. And based off everything else that we've seen, even the 2020 election results and prior to it, it's a very real possibility that there is a victory for David Perdue and a victory for Raphael Warnock. And final point, right before we end this, approval rating, not just of those senators, but of President Trump. On Election Day, Donald Trump had an approval rating that was higher than it is right now. His approval rating on Election Day was 45%. His disapproval rating was 53%. Today, his disapproval rating remains at 53%, but his approval rating has dropped down from what was 44.6% down to 42.7%, a decrease of 2%. And the disapproval rating, while I rounded up and then rounded down, actually changed by a margin of 0.5%. So when you're looking at the decrease and knowing that Georgia was extremely close, it could actually make a difference that Donald Trump is not approved of, higher than he was before the election or on Election Day. Because if these voters pushed away anyone that was really, not really anyone, but I guess they pushed them to a runoff, anyone that was associated with Donald Trump or pushed them to a runoff election, and they pushed away Donald Trump out of the state, going to a Democrat, first time in 3 decades, I don't think people realize Georgia actually went blue in this election. That's something that I still am comprehending, but looking at Georgia and the approval rating of President Trump, if it was higher then, what do you think is going to happen now that it's decreased? And you could say 2% isn't a lot, but look at the margin of victory in Georgia. It is a lot. That's 10 times the margin of victory. It is everything, especially in extremely close states, which is why if you aren't as closely associated with Donald Trump as Kelly Loeffler, you may actually be the one winning the Senate race. It may not be 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans. It may come down to a point where the Democratic Party is able to win one race and the Republican Party is able to win another. And if that happens, I can guarantee it, it's just going to be just as bad, just as contentious in the United States Senate. We're going to hear so much about it. And I know that may be exciting for some people who are super extremely interested in politics, but I can guarantee it, this is going to be something that we are going to be closely watching. The Senate races are going to be exceptionally close, that any type of vacancy possibility or any type of special election possibility is probably going to get a lot of attention, a lot of money funded into the race. This race particularly, we've seen $100 million raised on both sides, combined for the Democrats over $200 million. Looking at the regular election, Democrats outperform in the special election and in the regular election. So David Perdue's raised $89 million. Ossoff raised $138 million. Interesting fact really quick about Jon Ossoff. He has broken the record for House Democrats and House Democrats and Senate Democrats, candidates or, whoever. He single-handedly has raised the most money for a Democrat in a Senate campaign and in a House campaign in United States history. He raised $37 million in the state of Georgia, in the 6th Congressional District, or $33 million, somewhere there. The only person to ever pass him was Representative Steve Scalise. Looking at the Senate races, no one has really gotten close. No one has really gotten close. This $100 million number is something that I believe that was broken by Jamie Harrison, but Jon Ossoff is on track to defeat, well, he already has the House record, but also the Senate record for most money raised in a time period for the Democratic Party. And that's also kind of crazy to think about, that over $200 million has been spent on the Democratic side, that nearly $200 million has been spent on the Republican side, or will be spent by the time the election is up. It's crazy to think about that much money. I'm sure if you live in Georgia, or if you're in South Carolina, Tennessee, North Carolina, Alabama, Florida, any neighboring state of Georgia, that you've seen the political ads, and there's a reason for that. because they have money to spend. Both parties have $1 million a day for all 4 campaigns ending through the January 5th runoff date. So you're going to see a lot more of that. Now, there is always that possibility, and it is actually a very likely scenario that a Democrat wins and a Republican wins. I wouldn't say actually very likely, because I wouldn't say that is the most likely scenario to happen. It'll probably end up being 2-2. But then again, as I said around the middle of this video, weirder things have happened this year. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my post-2020 election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.